Hello, everybody. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Your Overseas Home. My name is Hannah Armstrong, and I'm one of the team here at Your Overseas Home, and I'll be taking you through today's session. Now, as you may know, as a business, we have been assisting buyers with their property purchases for over 10 years now. We aim to connect you with experts in the industry, help you save money, and crucially, make the process as enjoyable as possible. So wherever you are listening from today, thank you so much for joining us, and we're delighted to be able to help you on your property buying journey. Now, today's session, we're going to focus on moving to Italy, and I'm joined by Daniel Shillito from D&G Property Advice in Italy, who is a leading expert on this market and can help you with all aspects of the buying journey and through this exciting process of relocating to Italy. So without further ado, I will hand over to Daniel to take us through his presentation. And then at the end, I will put some of your typical burning questions to him. And we hope you enjoy. Over to you, Daniel.
Great. Thank you very much, Hannah. I appreciate that introduction. I appreciate the opportunity from Your Overseas Home to be here today and present this Italy and buying in Italy and living in Italy and moving to Italy. So today I've created a little agenda which I'm going to bring up for you now, and this is what we're going to run through. We're going to run through, first of all, why do people even move to Italy and consider Italy or buy a property so they can spend more time potentially in Italy. Then we'll look at buying in Italy, and this is no means an in-depth look. It's going to be a brief overview because the buying process itself will take some time to run through. It'll probably take the length of this webinar all by itself, but I'll give you a few brief points and some tips about buying, as well as an overview of the process. We'll then look at visas and residency, and particularly for either non-EU citizens versus EU citizens, and where there's a clear difference. I'll then talk about working in Italy and your options there, particularly with respect to either working in a job or in a self-employed fashion. I'll then touch on living and lifestyle issues in Italy and the cost of living to finish off before we consider your questions. Okay, so let's move right into why Italy. Now, people move to Italy for many, many reasons, and I'm sure I probably haven't included them all here, but I've made a brief list that we can look at. I mean, I start off with this picture because if you only have to look at Instagram, for example, and search on a few profiles that include Italy in there to find incredible images like these of various places that you can see and live and enjoy in Italy. Italy has a climate that many people envy, although I do say, in my experience, that it's a climate of 4 seasons, and in most regions you do notice the seasonal changes, which I think is great to experience, even though all year round it's relatively mild as an average in most places. And of course, for many people wondering, there's plenty of sun to be found in Italy. Nature is abundant. The variety of places that you can experience nature, and all different kinds of nature, is quite amazing. It's quite diverse. So for example, that little acronym I've used there, ICCM, that is a little reminder for me to stand for islands, coastal locations, cities, mountains, lakes, hills, and farming or agricultural areas. Italy's got them all. So you can find in different regions, and sometimes in some regions you can find 4 or 5 of these remarkably, but most regions have at least got 1 or 2 of these natural characteristics which make living there very attractive. Italy, of course, is full of culture and art and ancient history, which is not just something that is in the background or is in any kind of in the library. It's actually lived. The culture is lived, and you can experience that wherever you are in Italy. And it also is quite local or experienced with local nuance, and the local traditions are constantly celebrated and come about on multiple occasions during every year. And many people enjoy that experience and that community and that culture, and they come to Italy for that. Italy's lifestyle and work-life balance, I think, is another reason why people come. They may be yearning to get away from a different lifestyle where perhaps they're working lots of hours, whereas in Italy, even though there are professionals that work extremely hard, there is a work-life balance, and there's a real appreciation of time for family, time for recreation, time for experiencing culture. And within Italy, there, of course, you can find a variety of homes and lifestyles in different regions, depending on what kind of lifestyle sort of suits you. The cost of living, I'm going to touch on that a bit later, but typically they're relatively low compared to some of the major Western economies like the US, the UK. Food and wine, another obviously world-renowned and exported everywhere. There's not much to say about food and wine. Obviously, they're very proud of their local Italian food, so it's a good idea if you love Italian food and wine to come to Italy, because they're going to find the majority of that. You'll find international foods as well, but the Italian wine and food itself experience is quite amazing and quite diverse in itself. Attractive retirement. Italy has conditions which make retiring here very attractive, and that's why many people decide later on in their life that they want to buy in Italy and move to Italy, because it's got an exceptional environment for retirement. Tax incentive schemes, particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, Italy has launched 3 or 4 specific tax concessions for people in all different categories or different stages of life, whether you're working, whether you're retiring, whether you're an investor who wants to invest in Italy. And they're doing that to attract as many people as possible, particularly those that are going to come along and contribute to helping Italy recover from the current crisis that we're experiencing. So they're just some of the reasons, and I probably haven't mentioned 1 or 2 that you may even be holding close to your heart as the reason why you're looking into Italy right now. So let's talk about buying in Italy particularly, and a brief overview. As I said, there's not time to go into everything, so this is not meant to be exhaustive. But let's start right at the top, which is a question I get often from people around the world, which is, am I legally allowed to buy in Italy? Are there particular hurdles, or is the problem with my citizenship compared to another one? And the answer is normally you can, and that's a result of the way that Italy approaches citizenships, foreign citizens buying in Italy. And that is as per the slide. If your country already has a bilateral agreement, and many countries do, with Italy, that agreement will state that citizens of that foreign country are allowed to buy in Italy. And normally it's because Italy has negotiated to make sure too that Italians, if they want to, can buy in that foreign country. So you may already have a bilateral agreement, which you may or may not be aware of, but you can find out through some legal advice. Or in the absence of an actual bilateral agreement with every other country in the world, Italy uses the rule of, or law of reciprocity, to indicate that if there's nothing else in writing, you can buy as long as an Italian can buy in your own country where you come from, where you're a citizen. And if Italians can buy there, then the law of reciprocity is the default position and would mean that you can buy in Italy. Here's some popular buying areas that I've helped people from all over the world buy in throughout Italy. So Tuscany, Puglia, Umbria, these are some of the regions where British people, American people, South Africans, Australian, New Zealanders, Germans, French people, all over the world, these areas we find a lot of interest. Abruzzo, Lazio, like Como, Lago Maggiore, Sicily in the south, Piemonte, the Cinque Terre region, and within those regions, specific cities there, I've mentioned as a list of a few, and obviously very famous as well from a tourism perspective, if you think of the likes of Florence and Venice and Rome. Now, the home buying process itself, to get into slightly more technical territory, really revolves around 3 contracts and 3 documents that make up the process almost from beginning to end. Now, there's a lot of other factors that go into buying, and on the next slide, I'm going to run through 5 tips that you should take into account and consider when you're buying in Italy. But in the meantime, to put some structure around it, I suppose, the process is like this. In the beginning, when you find the property, you determine where you want to live, you found the property, and you're thinking about negotiating. This is when a written proposal or proposta may be prepared to offer the price you're interested in to buy at, and hope that it gets agreed. And the good news about the proposta too is that normally there's a time limit on when the seller, you can put down a time limit where the seller needs to reply in to indicate their acceptance of your offer. And that document is really actually quite a small one with just some general terms and conditions and the price and the timing and that kind of thing. But it's at this time when you're, this moment in your journey when you also should be organising a survey, a building survey, an independent view of the property so you can check its structural integrity and identify any property issues. The second step of the process is the preliminary contract or compromesso. And this is where the parties enter a more serious contract that is binding. It's normally much larger than the proposta, and you may include their specific conditions that need to be fulfilled before you're going to finally purchase the property. So for example, if you found some issues in the survey or at the proposta stage, you found a few things that needed to be resolved, and the seller may have already committed to resolving them. They may say, yes, we're going to fix something that needs to be fixed to make sure that it's within the current regulations. Well, then you can put those things into the preliminary contract, make it very specific that you won't be concluding until those things are achieved. Alternatively, you may be getting a mortgage, and this is the time to put in the mortgage as a condition of your purchase. And then finally, if those things have been agreed and then any conditions are fulfilled, you can move on to the rogito, which is the final. I liken it to a contract of sale, and it's really the final definitive legal contract that facilitates the transfer of title from the seller to the buyer. And it is generally a very long document and has lots of attachments about the technical specifications of the building and the history of the home and the owners and the past transfers of property. And once that is signed and agreed upon and the money transferred for purchase, that is then lodged formally with the local government and transfers the title to you. So that's the buying process in terms of structurally, if you like, in the three elements. Now, I just want to give you 5 tips when you're buying in Italy within that process that you might take away from this if you're at the stage of looking right now or about to negotiate. The first one is to understand the cultural differences when you're in Italy and it comes to buying and negotiating, because the reality is that the selling behavior and the culture here is going to likely be different to where you come from. You may have bought property already in another country or in your own country, but I can tell you that it pays to think about the process and the behavior that's going on in Italy from a cultural perspective. So to give you an example, for a purchase contract in Italy, timing is normally very different and very open and flexible. There is no standard or set timing expectation. For example, that this purchase process should take 1 month or 3 months or 6 months or 9 months or longer. So every purchase, there's an opportunity to negotiate that between buyer and seller. And the seller may have very different expectations than you imagine when you first make an offer. It may not be that they're ready to sell urgently or quickly or within 3 months. They may have a couple of other things they need to get in place before they're ready to actually go to the rogito. So that's something you should definitely be aware of. Another thing is that a property could be on the market for a long period of time when you come along to view it or see it on the internet, for example. Now, the mistake you might make is to assume something about what the seller is doing there or whether or not the seller is urgent to sell. Now, if it's on for a long time, doesn't mean necessarily that it's urgent for the seller to sell. It could be that property has been listed and then relisted again. It could be that it's listed, but they're really only interested in selling if they can get a specific price for it under certain conditions. So it's wise to not make assumptions and take into account the local culture. And that's just a couple of examples, and there's several others. The second tip I've got here is to choose your professional. So you have the ability to choose the notaio, which is the notary locally in Italy that is required for every property purchase. The buyer has the right to choose that professional. And I think that's quite important, because together with the notary, you can try and make sure that some of your conditions and preferences, etc., are included in those contracts, and that person can alert you to any concerns. And perhaps that notary you choose is one which has got some of your preferences in terms of the legal state representative, which the notary is, some of your preferences for the type of notary you want. For example, one that speaks really good English or German or whatever your native language is. If you're able to find a notary in the area where the property is, then that would be potentially something preferential. Also, maybe the price of the notary's fees is something you can take into account in your choice of notary. You can also choose the lawyer, of course, for the transaction. You don't need to take recommendations by the selling agent upon the professionals that you choose. Another tip, understand all the fees and costs, because they're not necessarily laid out for you from the beginning by the agent or any one person. So it's one thing that we do at D&G Property Advice, is make sure we understand all the individual costs from all the different professionals and parties into one schedule, and manage that as a budget, if you like, for your property purchase. Because sometimes a fee or a charge may not be mentioned by one of the parties that you're using in Italy, or it may be mentioned only at the last minute. And so you should seek that advice and not assume that you're getting all the information from the first person or people you engage in Italy on the property sale. You should complete a building survey. I've already talked about that in the previous step, but I think it's essential in Italy to make sure that you get an independent view of the state of the property, and particularly if there's been any unauthorized renovations, for example. That's what a survey will uncover those and help you to begin to determine how you're going to deal with them if there are any issues to consider. And finally, if you need a mortgage in Italy for a purchase, you should start talking about that and planning for that in advance, long before the offer is approved, I would suggest. Not approved, accepted. Okay, now let's move on from here. And this is just a slide to show you that some of the resources that we have at D&G Property Advice to assist buyers moving through the process, cost schedules, mortgage inquiry information, charts to understand the process, and how we coordinate all the suppliers in the property process. Now, let's move on to visas and residency. Again, this won't be an in-depth look. This is just a general summary, so please don't accept this as any kind of legal advice, because it's not. It's a general understanding of how the visa and residency situation works, and you should get advice for your particular situation. So first of all, I'm going to look at the right-hand side on EU citizens. If you're an EU citizen already, you can stay in Italy for longer than 3 months, provided you attend the local council office. You provide them with an evidence of your local address in Italy. You provide them with evidence of health insurance that you've got that's in place for at least a year, and evidence of a small amount of savings that you have in the bank. And as an EU citizen, you'll be able to achieve residency fairly swiftly. Alternative, of course, if you're not an EU citizen, and that includes not just America and Australia and places like that, but also the UK as of 31 December for sure, then you'll need to apply most likely through a visa process, which may be a lot easier, for example, if you have any family heritage with Italy. If you've got any history of Italian citizenship in your family, then there's a good chance you'll be able to get onto a citizenship process, and that will make your stay and your residency much more, and your free movement in Italy much more easy. Also, spouses of Italian citizens have generally a smoother approach to residency, and so that should be taken into account. A spouse doesn't necessarily need to go through their own visa process separate to if they have an Italian citizen. Otherwise, if you don't have that luxury, then you will need to apply for a visa in Italy. And there is a 3-step process to residency. The visa is the first step. A permit to stay, which is a separate document, is required once the visa is obtained and you enter the country. With that visa, you can apply for the permit to stay. Once you achieve the permit to stay, you can then register with the local community as being on the register as a resident in your area. That's how it works. The types of visas, there's work visas, there's a student visa, or there's retiree or self-funded types of visas, including the investor visa. And I've just, on the next slide, for those of you that are not working, I've summarized 2 of the main non-working visas in Italy here. So on the right-hand side, the investor visa for those who want to perhaps start a process that they can be much faster. If they have the financial resources to do so, you can invest in Italy and be granted an investor visa, which is a 2-year renewable visa for the whole Schengen area and free movement, essentially. And to achieve that, there are 4 different types of investments that the Italian government provides that you could choose from. And if you can afford to invest in an Italian startup, for example, startup company, for 250,000 euros, then you can be granted a 2-year Schengen visa. Alternatively, there's those 3 alternatives. Aside from the investor visa, those people that are not working will tend to move towards elective residence visa, which we see a lot of. And these provide a 1-year renewable visa to enable you to stay in Italy. And the recent law change in Italy to try and make it a bit more flexible is to allow people that achieve the elective resident visa also to work. They can actually apply for a work permit. So if you decide that you want to get back into employment, or even if you want to run a business or work remotely, that can be possible now in Italy with an elective residence visa. Previously, it was a visa only designed for people that were not working. And the requirements for elective residence visa are in brief. Applying firstly at the foreign consulate. You cannot enter the country and apply for it. You need to apply at the Italian consulate in your country. You have to have evidence of an Italian address in Italy where you're going to stay. You have to have health insurance in place and evidence of your own financial security, so that it's clear you're not relying on working in Italy when you get here. Let's move on now to working in Italy and giving you a quick summary of the environment for work. So clearly, first of all, we all need to decide, are you going to be looking for a job or do you want to run your own business? Now, once you have a right to stay in Italy, you have the option to run your own business or to get a job. It's entirely up to you, and there's no barriers in that respect. Italy actually has a very high rate of entrepreneurship and small and medium-sized businesses and consultants. So that's definitely something that's possible, but I recommend that you seek advice on any incentives to run your own business in certain areas of Italy that there may be, and also the setup costs that are associated with running your own business. For working in Italy right now, one of those tax incentives I touched on earlier are that a new tax resident to Italy can work either a job or a business, and 70 to 90% of their income won't be taxable. It'll be tax-free for 5 years. That's a current working scheme that the government has set up that's just started and was in place from around about 12 months ago. And that 5 years can also be extendable in certain conditions, which include if you buy a property in Italy or you have children under 18, then your tax-free period can actually be extended for another few years. Okay, working a job. My recommendations in terms of employment in Italy is that you try and find a role before you arrive. If you're going to be employed in Italy, the reality is that the work visas are a limited number. That Italy has a cap on the work visas each year, and that's because they want to make sure that Italians are in work first, naturally enough, and so they have priority. And so the number of visas can run out during a year. So you may be unfortunate if you come and start to apply later in the year and you're looking for a work visa, and if Italy has already reached its cap, then you might find it more difficult than you would have expected to get a work visa. It's not an unlimited open scheme, it is a limited scheme. And I'd suggest that to find some work, to find an employer, preferably before you arrive, but use online recruiters and job directories, including LinkedIn and target recruiters on LinkedIn that have an international viewpoint. And they may have foreign employers that are looking for employees in Italy that you might be able to join, that might be multilingual, for example, and also local Italian employers, but who may have an international mindset. And that's the reason why I give that suggestion. One thing to note about the employment market in Italy and how it works is that for a long time there's been a trend of young people in Italy moving from the southern regions to the northern regions. And to give a specific example, recently I was reading some statistics that over the last 10 years, around about 150,000 young people have moved, young people who are educated as well, have moved from many of the southern regions, particularly from Puglia and Sicily and Calabria, and moved up to the northern regions like Lombardia and Emilia-Romagna. And that is a trend which is continuing and has done for a long time. And that gives you an understanding, I guess, about where a lot of the employment opportunities are in Italy. In terms of sectors, this is one interesting one. Italy has made it known how they're going to spend their recovery fund from the EU post coronavirus. And this is the areas that they're going to focus on. So that would mean that money is going to be invested into these areas, which will mean jobs. And so jobs will be created, particularly in these sectors, in digitalization, in green policies and sustainable development, infrastructure projects, education and research, and healthcare. So if it so happens that you're a professional or a specialist, someone just interested in working in these particular areas, and that's what you're looking for, I'd suggest there's going to be a greater than average number of employment opportunities in these sectors in Italy. Finally, I'm going to touch on the lifestyle of Italy, and then I'll hand back to Hannah to ask me any questions. So lifestyle-wise, well, at the beginning of this, I talked about some of the characteristics of Italy that people are looking for in terms of climate and culture and lifestyle. And aside from that, in terms of the living experience, now we've been here in Italy for 10 years, so we've lived it ourselves, and we can say without any doubt that the people that you find here are friendly and welcoming. They tend to share their time willingly, and I think that's a very important thing from a lifestyle point of view. I think Italians are shy with foreign languages when it comes to speaking them themselves, but they're willing to try. So they try wherever they can, and there's a good level of English generally throughout, and especially in the northern regions. However, Italians are shy with languages, and that's just part of the territory. In terms of living costs, I noticed that Italy is ranked around about the middle within 40 different countries throughout Europe in terms of their average living costs. And I've made a comparison there. For example, it seems to be slightly cheaper on the scale than places like the UK, Ireland, and France, but slightly higher in terms of living costs than Spain, Portugal, and Greece. And you're going to find lots of different reviews and opinions about Italy online, either from people who have visited for a short time or people that are expats here. So I encourage anyone to have a look at those communities. There will be plenty of Facebook groups, for example, and everybody's got a different opinion about Italy. And you can read a lot more about that online as part of your research. So I recommend that you do that. And I've just left my contacts up there for anyone that wants to get further information, certainly about buying and the buying process, transitioning your life financially to Italy, or any questions related to this presentation and immigration and residency, that kind of thing. If I can't resolve it immediately myself, I can certainly pass you on to a colleague or a trusted partner that can help you get what you need to help you move to Italy successfully. Okay, how's that, Hannah? Have you got some questions for me?
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Daniel. Yeah, I really think that was a fantastic initial overview for our customers listening. And I certainly do have some questions for you and things that we do commonly get asked. It's worth noting to anybody listening today that this session is being recorded in January 2021. So if there are any answers that are sort of particularly sort of time sensitive, that's worth noting when we are recording today. So my first question for you, Daniel, you mentioned there about applying for mortgages to purchase in Italy. Can you give any indication how difficult or how easy it would be for British buyers to secure a mortgage to buy in Italy?
And that's a good question. And so it's not standard for every Italian bank to provide mortgages for foreign citizens, British included. And so in one respect, there's no differentiation there, whether it's American client as well, for example, or Australian or others. And there's a small amount of banks and indeed departments within banks that may specialize on lending to foreign citizens that have foreign currency incomes, for example. That they can be quite sensitive about that. So there are mortgages available, there's no doubt about it, and they have certain criteria, and the best suggestion that I have is to partner with the equivalents of a mortgage broker here who understands the market and where to take your inquiry. Unfortunately, it doesn't work as simply as approaching a major bank or walking in off the street and saying, this is my situation, will you provide me a mortgage? That could lead to a fair bit of disappointment or at least delay. So it's best to get hold of someone who's a specialist, who's done international mortgages for foreign buyers before, who know the best banks to go to and how it works. But it's definitely possible. There has been some bumps over the last year or two with Brexit and banks not sure whether they wanted to lend all the time to British people with sterling incomes, and that's just a result of the current climate. But those bumps, I think, are ironing out, and it'll settle down even more to hopefully provide more options for British people in the future.
Brilliant, thank you. And I suppose moving on and moving through the buying journey, what could a customer expect to pay in terms of the costs? Surveyors' fees, legal fees, things like that. What would sort of typical costs be?
Yeah, that's a good question, and something that obviously very important when you're starting out of the buying process. So what I try to do is give people a percentage estimate, but percentages are not very good if you've got a very small value property or a high value property. So if you think of an average size property, I'd like to say that people should budget for around about 8 or 9 or 10% purchase costs. And depending on the property, depending on the professionals that you can engage, that could easily stretch to 15%. Okay, so if you've got a property for a certain budget, take sort of an 8 to 12% of that purchase price and say, I'm going to need to budget for those costs, because they do exist there for things like the survey cost, for the notary cost that's required for every transaction, the agent's fees in Italy. If you have any other approvals or documentation that needs to be processed to the local council and any other advisors, that kind of thing, and the government taxes, of course. And if you've got a mortgage, there's also a mortgage tax. So the problem is, if it's a smaller value property, of course, the percentages are going to look a lot higher. So that won't necessarily occur, but there'll be some fixed fees that you'll have to incur regardless, even for a smaller size property. So keep that in mind, and make sure you get the opportunity to break down all the costs and seek that out proactively at the beginning of your journey, so you understand what those costs are going to be.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really helpful. Just thinking now about kind of the world of work, I suppose, really in Italy. Obviously, COVID has seen a lot of us working from home. I'm at home, you're at home today, and that's happening to a lot of us. And we know that some of our customers are seeking to relocate overseas, but continue working from home for British employers or employers in other countries. Can you just give us any indication how likely or how easy that might be for our listeners?
Sure. Well, in terms of working remotely, yes, clearly that is a booming trend at the moment, and I think it's something that's got people interested in terms of moving away from where they've always lived, or maybe accelerating plans to move to another country. So Italy's getting that same experience. In fact, there was lots of Italians last year, I read, that came back to Italy, at least temporarily, to work for their foreign employers remotely. So my first thoughts are that is something that is definitely be done on the short term. We've proved around the world we can do that from a short-term basis. The question is whether or not that remote working flexibility can be acceptable to an employer over a longer term, of course. So it may be that needs to be sorted out, I think, before you consider that as a viable long-term option. But I say that the workplace and the workforce, both in Italy and abroad, is becoming more and more flexible, and there's no reason why you won't be able to spend at least part of your time remote working. And I think there'll be a lot of people that are consultants that perhaps don't have one employer and work for many different clients, who will definitely be able to work remotely from their homes or home offices around Italy. It is possible. Clearly, if you're going to be self-employed in Italy, you need to pay attention to the costs of setting up, and that will include not just taxes, but your social security obligations to Italy, and so they need to be taken into account. And you also need to keep, if you're having a foreign employer as well, obviously they need to be informed of those costs and take those different things into account. So really, you need to get advice from a professional in Italy about what those costs are and how to set up in a safe way, where the employer is obviously encouraged and happy to support you in living and working in Italy. That's what I'd say.
Great, thank you. And I think we've got time for one more quick question before we wrap up today. As I mentioned again, sure. January 2021 is the time that we're in at the moment. But can you give us any indication on sort of market conditions at the moment? Are prices going up? Are prices going down? Is now the time to get a good deal? Is demand high? Where are we at with property prices, given everything that's happened in the last 12 months?
That's a good question, a really good question. I think that it's tempting to think that prices would be discounted across the board because there will be an expectation that people are perhaps doing it tough and can't expect the same prices that they would have expected on their homes 12 months, 18 months ago. And I think that that's not a bad summary, and it makes sense. We've gone through an incredibly difficult time for Italy and for the world. But I think one thing that it's done overall that will affect the market is that people have stopped doing what they were doing. So people that were putting properties on the market may have stopped the process of putting them on. So you're just not even seeing the property on the market, or they had them on the market and they just took them off completely because they knew people couldn't come and visit. So yes, in January 2021, obviously people can't come and visit readily online. It has increased though the number of online. They can't visit the property in person, but they have to go online. So that's going to, I think, leave a lot of property off the market essentially until later this year. You know, I really want to see a lot more property come onto the market. It'll be interesting to find out then how that property moves and how it's priced. I think the Italian culture is more likely to hold on to things and delay activity rather than necessarily cut prices to move or to make a transaction happen. And one of that is it comes down to the culture of property and the habits of the local population in relation to property, and that is that property is generally a long-term asset that you hold and you don't sell really unless you need to. So unlike other countries where you may see property as a wealth-building asset that you might want to buy and sell more frequently or buy and rent out to others, that is not really the predominant aim for property by the local population. So therefore you can't necessarily expect the same market fluctuations based on any kind of crisis. So I think that's how I would think people need to be aware of when buying in Italy. So the jury's out in some respect till later this year, but I think certainly there's going to be opportunities here and there where people do need to sell and they cannot wait longer, and so they're just waiting for the moment to get that property in the market and sell it. There'll be some like that, but I don't think we can see across the board massive price cuts. Obviously, the longer any crisis goes on, the harder it gets and the more urgent sales become. So let's see what happens.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that insight. It's been a really, really helpful overview for us today.
You're welcome.
Just before we sign off, I just want to mention to our listeners, obviously Daniel's contact details are on screen. If we can help with any introductions or if we can put you in touch with anybody else for your buying journey, please do get in touch with Your Overseas Home. We've also got a wealth of other resources available on our website, on the on-demand section of our website. There's loads of other similar videos to this that will help with your buying journey. So have a look there. That's all from me today. Thank you again, Daniel, and we wish you happy property hunting.
Thank you very much, Hannah.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.